1917, General Allenby takes Jerusalem. 1967, 50 years later, one Jubilee. The nation of Israel, which didn't exist in 1917, took Jerusalem. 2017 being the next Jubilee. Well, that Jubilee also happens to be 70 years from when Israel became a nation in one day, fulfilling the 2,600-year-old prophecy of Isaiah. When we see all these patterns in place, we have to say that this may be the hand of the Almighty. It could be coincidence, but I think we'd be foolish to just brush it all aside as just coincidence. We need to open our eyes and see if the Almighty is not telling us something.
In Leviticus 23, the Father tells Moses to tell the Israelites that he's got a calendar and he's got appointments on them. And he sums them up. There are 7 appointments. There's Passover, there's unleavened bread, there's first fruits, there's Pentecost, there's the Feast of Trumpets, there's the Feast of Atonement, and there's the Feast of Tabernacles.
All of Israel's feast days have to do with the phases of the moon. Some of the feasts will be started on the new moon. So the moon is extremely important in the feast days. As a matter of fact, Passover has to have a full moon.
The feast days are highly related to apocalyptic events, to the book of Revelation. We cannot understand the book of Revelation or the apocalypse without understanding the feast days.
The book of the Revelation is the Messiah fulfilling the fall feast of the Lord. All those things that we were to rehearse that the scriptures speak of, from Yom Teruah, the day of trumpets, day of shouting, through Yom Kippur and the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, it is all there, embedded in there, and it's all in the book of the Revelation. The Creator runs the universe according to His time clock. Whether we recognize it, live by it, understand it or not, makes no difference to Him. And I was given a manuscript concerning the prophecy of a 13th century Jewish sage, a rabbi, Judah the Righteous. He said that for 400 years, 8 Jubilees, the Ottoman Turks would rule Jerusalem. Then it would be no man's land for 1 Jubilee. And then the next Jubilee, it would be in the hands of the Jewish nation. And then the next Jubilee would be the beginning of the end-time Messianic age. In 1217, Judah the Righteous spoke these words. 300 years, 6 Jubilee periods later, in 1517, the Ottoman Turks took Jerusalem. They held it for 400 years, exactly 8 Jubilees to 1917. That is when General Allenby took Jerusalem. It immediately, under the guidance and the directive of the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations, was labeled no man's land. Exactly the words of Judah the Righteous hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. And for 1 Jubilee was no man's land, and then the Jewish nation, which had not been for nearly 2,000 years, took Jerusalem and has now held it in 2017. According to Judah the Righteous, begins the end-time Messianic age.
This is the 50th year or Jubilee anniversary for Jerusalem, but also we have the 70th anniversary of Israel becoming a nation. These are right on top of each other. Could something happen prophetically this year?
And we look at Israel and what's been happening to Israel years ago to come back into her land. It seems to have started 120 years ago. A man named Theodor Herzl held a congress in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, in which at the end of the conference he wrote in his notes that he founded the Jewish state. If Theodor Herzl founded the Jewish state in 1897, the next step that took place was the Balfour Declaration. This happened in 1917. And then the next thing that happened was that the UN General Assembly decided to vote, and they voted to create the State of Israel. That was in 1947. Then the Jews started coming back in their land. There was a war in 1948, which is called the War of Independence. They got their land, and they declared themselves a state. In 1967, there was another war, of which the Jews took back their capital, which they didn't have in 1947 or 48. But you've got everything landing on a 7. 1897. 1917, 1947, 1967, and a Jubilee, which is a special 50-year period to the Jews. From 1967 lands us in 2017, of which there are 2 epic signs in the heavens, which are declaring, possibly, the return of the Messiah. 120 years, 100 years, 70 years, 50 years. And year 0, then, could only be, counting this way, 2017 would be the beginning of the apocalypse.
Human city. The only place we have left.